I'm going to be topical today and talk about user experience in the times of a pandemic. So, UX under COVID. Now, over the last 6 months, almost all of our lives have changed in a huge number of ways. And these here are just a few examples of the sort of ways in which most people's lives have changed quite dramatically. And of course, changing people's lives changes the natures of users. And I just want to think briefly about some of the types of changes that there have been to users. There are very obvious behavioural changes, first of all, because, well, people have a desire to avoid catching the virus, and also frequently because governments and health authorities have a desire to change people's behaviour to control the virus. So a lot of these behavioural changes are forced effectively. And some people have quite major economic consequences that have again changed their behaviour. And there are other issues, things like peer pressure and such like. There are psychological changes. There's a lot more anxiety and stress about than there was before the pandemic. And some people have a real lack of confidence in travelling or in being in public spaces. And there can be really big mental health issues, which can be caused by isolation or indeed living in crowded environments. If you are isolated with your 5 children, it doesn't matter how much you love your children, that is probably going to be quite a stressful experience if you're not used to it. One of the most interesting changes that has been observed is there is a new sort of grouping of users based upon how risk averse or risk tolerant they are. These are different types of people with different needs and different preferences. And here is a really interesting Spanish study. I've given you a reference to the paper there, although it is, I'm afraid, in Spanish. But it's a fascinating study. It's a hotel looking at the effect that the images on a website was having upon the feelings of the users of that website, and showing them on one hand a conventional sort of image of hotel rooms, but on the other hand, the image on the left here is one of a person spraying disinfectant and wearing a lot of protective gear. How does that make people feel? Well, they found that it varies a lot. It varies wildly. Some people are reassured by the images of the disinfectant, but other people find it scary and intimidating. There was a feeling, and there still is a feeling, that risk averse versus risk tolerant has some impact upon that. But initially, they found it very hard to predict which groups people were going to fall into. When they drilled into the data, though, they found something very interesting, is that a lot of people find these sorts of images of disinfectant and protective clothing reassuring if it's in big public spaces, things like a hotel lobby, but scary and intimidating if it's in a private personal space, somewhere like a bedroom or your private bathroom. These things aren't very well understood because the pandemic's only been with us for 6 months, and that's a very, very short period of time to actually do research and publish the studies. There are also regional effects. Different countries have different attitudes. Think for a moment about mask wearing and attitudes to mask wearing. I mean, partly this is due to the amount of virus in that country, but it's also partly due to the perception of local responses. In Britain, for example, British people grudgingly wear masks, and it's becoming more and more common, but it's by no means universal. And although in some places it's enforced, again, it's not universal and it's pretty grudging. In Southeast Asia, masks were absolutely de rigueur from day one. And it would be very unusual to find somebody not wearing a mask in Southeast Asia, and that would be considered deeply antisocial. In America, there's a lot of resistance to masks. It's seen as a civil liberty issue, and there have been demonstrations on the streets against wearing masks. Not from all Americans, but from some. So you just see that just because there are changes to users in one area, in one country, in one culture, it doesn't mean that these changes are universal. Okay, I'm going to very briefly just give you 2 case studies of some user experience work that's been done relating to the pandemic. And one of these is in a bit of product development, which is Microsoft Teams, and another one is in a bit of research, which is a published paper on some online shopping changes to behavior. So looking at Microsoft Teams was probably one of Microsoft's more obscure products a year ago that has had a meteoric career in the last 6 months. It's very much bringing collaborative work to the masses, and quite possibly whereas a turning point for remote working as a result of Teams and Zoom and other systems like that. And Microsoft, of course, have very deep pockets. They do a lot of research, and they've been incorporating many new features into Teams over the last few months, making remote working more easily accessible. And just here's a few of them. This real-time noise suppression is built into Teams, and one of the most important, in a conferencing system, any communication system, one of the most important things that you can do for a good user experience is to have high quality sound. Doesn't matter how good your video is and how good your interaction design is, if you can't understand what somebody's saying, you will have a lousy user experience. And so they put a lot of work into improving the quality of the sound. They put in face tracking. When people are crammed onto the screen together, the image will center on people's faces automatically, so you can see people, so that you can have better conversations. A big issue is the raise hand feature. It's a tiny trivial thing. You press this little button, and a hand icon comes up next to your picture or next to your name in a list. But that makes it so much easier if there are lots of people all trying to get in a word in edgeways. Related to that sort of thing, related to having conversations, gallery mode, that's something that wasn't in Teams 6 months ago, but now it most certainly is. And if you can see lots of people conversing, you can see who is saying what, it's a much closer experience to a real physical conversation. And recently, Microsoft have taken it one step further with what is called Together Mode. They slice people out of their backgrounds and put them in this virtual lecture theatre, which again makes the community side of it much more realistic, if you like. So the other case study is, I'm just very briefly going to mention, is a case study that's been done on the changes in the workflow of users during online shopping. And in this paper, they made a whole bunch of observations about users and distilled those into a whole set of recommendations. I'm just going to give you as an example a couple of them. So one is to do with delivery and pickup. Sounds obvious, but apparently not. Is that users should be told if there are delivery and pickup slots available before they put work into the actual shopping, before you fill your basket, rather than spending half an hour shopping and then be told that you can't actually have it delivered, because that's just massively frustrating. And it is good practice to be able to reserve it in advance, and it's good practice to be told if in your particular location you can't have something delivered at the time at which you want it, because any violation of these things is going to be frustrating and going to be a poor user experience. Another thing, it's inevitable that sometimes the the warehouse will be out of stock and you won't be able to get what you want. And usually there is a way of allowing people to have substitutions. But often it isn't done very well, and it's quite possible to get some weird things substituted for you. I've been getting a lot of deliveries over the last 6 months, and I know I've had some really, really peculiar substitutions. So it's good practice to allow users to specify replacements for these products while they're shopping, and then to show them what replacements they've got and allow them to change that in a dedicated page when they check out. And this is something I've never seen implemented, but it's a simple idea. Why not send them a text warning them that they're going to have the substitutes and asking them if they want to not have those substitutes or have a different substitute. So there are lots of other recommendations in other areas to do with the shopping process and to do with money and to do with contacting people when the deliveries get there, but I haven't got time to go into those now. So really, this was just a quick overview of the sorts of issues that there are relating to the pandemic. And I'm sure you can think of many others. We haven't even talked about the issues to do with communicating whilst wearing masks. How do people with specific learning differences communicate? How do people convey emotions wearing masks? There are big issues there. You might want to think about those, but for the time being, that's all I've got to say. So thank you very much for listening.